Hello and welcome to Bread and Thread, a podcast about food and domestic history. I'm Liz.
I'm Hazel. We are two friends who studied archaeology together and love history and making things and the history of making things. And we usually start by talking about the things we have been making. So, what have you been up to recently?
I made soap. I got some malt and pour and I made some bars of soap.
That's amazing.
One of them smells like lavender and is like a blue sky with little shiny white clouds, and one of them smells of strawberry jam and looks like a PB&J.
Okay, so I know that because you have sent me the blue soap and I used it yesterday and it's fantastic. But I also did see your picture of the peanut butter jelly sandwich soap. And it's amazing.
I couldn't resist.
What made you want to try soap?
I watch a lot of Royalty Soaps videos.
What are those?
That's pretty much it. It is a family soap company based in Texas, and the woman that runs it posts a lot of soap making videos that are just like, I don't get on with ASMR, but they're like my version of ASMR. They're just incredibly satisfying to watch.
I feel like I'm gonna have to look this up.
And eventually I was just like, hey, I could make soap. But I was
And you
scared of
did?
lye and also have never made soap, so I'd made melt and pour.
Oh.
Except now I've agreed to make proper old-fashioned, like, pre-1850s soap for the Children's Archaeology Club I volunteer at. So I'm gonna have to work with lye and also beef fat.
That's kind of a difficulty jump, I feel.
Like, I will probably do an episode on soap in either July or August.
Yeah, I was just
So I
thinking
won't
about,
go
like,
too far into it, but soap is basically, at its most primitive level, is fat and ashes, and then eventually we figured out how to get the useful chemicals out of the ashes, but it's always fat and alkali.
I feel like
It's,
a history episode would be a good one. Like that's something that is very domestic that we haven't done yet.
yeah, it's getting to special interest territory like tea did, and then we ended up doing a tea episode. So there's going to be a soap episode at some point this summer. Watch this space.
Yay.
So what have you been up to?
Um, just continuing things really. I've been cloak making. Um, that's almost done. So that is the 18th century cloak for our Wuthering Heights costume project, which will be done in the indefinite future, but it's going to be great. But I have the cloak almost finished anyway.
Excellent.
Yeah, working on the hood, and it has pleats that I have never done before, so we're going to work that one out. Um, and then I've been doing quite a lot of knitting because it's fun and relaxing. So I'm making a shawl, and it's bright orange.
How bright orange are we talking? Is this the full Jaffa?
Not quite. It's not neon territory. It's
Okay.
like a nice bright orange.
I should probably explain Jaffa for our listeners who weren't in the Knitting Society at the University of York. It's basically this one shade of cheap, bright orange wool that everyone just hated because it was just such a hideous colour.
I feel like there was one person who liked it. And I can't remember who that was. Yeah, it was particularly hideous.
Like eye-burning orange.
Yeah, it wasn't even like proper neon. It was just like orange.
Is off neon a thing? Because I feel like that's the way to describe it.
Off-brand neon.
Off neon.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, no, fortunately mine is not Jaffa. It's pleasant orange. And I'm about halfway through and I enjoy it very much. I'm going to take a
Nice.
sip of it. So yeah,
So,
that is much what I've been up to.
so what are we learning about today?
So today I'm going to talk about muslin, the fabric, specifically Dhaka muslin, which is very significant for reasons that I will go on to explain.
Oh, foreshadowing.
Yes. And it's quite a good time to talk about it because there is a project that's emerged in recent years to kind of try and recreate and revitalize like the real handcrafted muslin. So I'll talk about that kind of in the end segment, but it's a relevant time to bring this up. But also because I have seen a few portraits recently. Well, the reason that I first started looking at this is because I read a BBC article about this project to revitalise it, which also had some of the history of it. And it turns out that a lot of famous portraits that I've seen had the subjects wearing Dhaka muslin. This very, very fine cotton cloth. And
So what?
I didn't realize. Like, for example, the Empress Josephine was a massive fan of this, and one of the most famous portraits of her is her wearing this sheer white dress that is made of Dhaka muslin. And also a lot of the portrait of Marie Antoinette wearing the chemise à la reine, like the very kind of floaty flouncy white cotton dress, also Indian muslin, Dhaka muslin. Yeah, it's actually kind of a big thing. It was massively popular in Europe during the late 18th and 19th century. And it's been really, really popular all over the world throughout history.
So what
Uh,
exactly is muslin as opposed to just like expensive cotton fabric?
okay, so good point, because there are many fabrics today that you can buy that are described as muslin. Um, they're not really. I mean, they are because that's now the modern definition of muslin. But
Yeah, because like in my mind, I think of like cheesecloth, and I'm
yeah,
guessing that's not what this is.
yeah, no. So muslin is what you would use today for making a mock-up of a sewing project, or in cooking. You might use it to like. My granny used it to like cover puddings and stuff, or you might use it for cheeses and um, yeah, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Sorry, my phone just beeped. I apologize. Turning that off. So it's a fine cotton fabric. That's kind of what the definition of muslin is. However, what I'm going to be talking about in this episode is the kind of muslin that was available, that was coming out of India um, for the 20th century, which is a completely different beast in terms of quality. Like, the thread counts are insane. Like today, a modern muslin might have a thread count, which is the number of threads per inch. So the more threads, higher the thread count, and the better quality the fabric. So a muslin today might have a thread count of about 40 to 80 threads per inch. The thread counts of this historical muslin that was being made in India were anywhere in the region of 800 to 1200.
Oh wow,
That
so a
is
little
incredibly
higher.
fine. Yeah, yeah, a little bit higher. Just like exquisite quality. And as you can imagine, it took a lot of skill to make this, and part of that is why I say Dhaka muslin. because this fabric was being made in India and most specifically associated with the city and the region of Dhaka, which is the capital of modern-day Bangladesh. And the reason that it was known that Dhaka was known for its muslin was because of the conditions they had that were perfect for producing it. Also because of a particular species of cotton plant that grew there and couldn't grow anywhere else. So that's why Dhaka is so famous for muslin. Yeah, so this cloth, just to illustrate how like prized it was throughout the world, there is a quote from a Chinese traveller in India in the 7th century who says the cloth is like the light vapours of dawn, which is beautiful. The Roman author Petronius, writing in the 1st century AD, says the humorous quote, "Thy bride might as well clothe herself with a garment of the wind as stand forth publicly naked under her clouds of muslin." So this fabric was so fine that it was basically sheer. And there were a lot of kind of wits of the day talking about like women looking naked if they were wearing it.
I wasn't expecting that to be one of our people have said the same thing forever moments.
I know. But if you're talking about
of her body, she might as well be naked.
There'll be another one of those later, but I think pretty much
That's my incensed old man voice.
I like it very much. I think if you're talking about anything to do with fashion and garments, that'll come up really. The yeah. So it was highly prized in the ancient world, in the Middle East, in China, in Greece. As we can see from these quotes, but then also became hugely popular in Europe as soon as it was easily available to get, which we're going to get to this later, but that's because of colonialism mostly.
What?
What?
On this podcast?
Again. Yeah, with a lot of material culture history, you kind of can't get away from it.
Should we just rename it to Colonialism Corner?
Maybe we should
now.
Make it slightly more lighthearted. That's what we have now. So I'm going to address that in a bit. But I also wanted to give you a quote from Northanger Abbey, which is the second time we've mentioned Northanger Abbey on this podcast.
I mean, it's very good.
I think I can't remember what the first one was. Was it something to do with novels?
Possibly. Wait. I don't have the transcripts open right now.
So muslin and dress are kind of features of this novel as well. It's a Jane Austen, in case you don't know. Would recommend. It's a very good book. And the hero of the story, Mr. Henry Tilney, is talking for the first time to Catherine Morland, the heroine, when her aunt comes up and says, "Do you understand muslins, sir?" Because they're talking about dresses and fabrics. And he says, "Particularly well. I always buy my own cravats and am allowed to be an excellent judge. And my sister has often trusted me in the choice of a gown. I bought one for her the other day, and it was pronounced to be a prodigious can I say that again?
Go for it.
Particularly well. I always buy my own cravats and am allowed to be an excellent judge, and my sister has often trusted me in the choice of a gown. I bought one for her the other day, and it was pronounced to be a prodigious bargain by every lady who saw it. I gave but 5 shillings a yard for it, and a true Indian muslin."
I realise it's not the takeaway we're supposed to have, or maybe it is, I don't know the context of the quote, but just the idea of I'm allowed to buy my own clothes.
I know. I was thinking that, like, I always buy my own cravats. Oh, how very cosmopolitan of you. Such a hardworking man. Truly a man of the people.
Nick,
Um,
you studied novels. Do you know the context of that quote? Is is he showing off how cosmopolitan he is because he knows about fabric?
he's kind of being nice to the aunt who is like very shallow and just always talks about clothes. But I think it's also meant to be a way of showing like how it contrasts him against the Catherine Morland's other romantic interest, who's like this really macho, boorish type guy. So I think it's meant to show that he is like
He's not like other boys.
polished man. Yeah, like, you know, a man of refined taste. Because he also likes novels, and this book is about like how novels are good actually. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, so anyway, I included it here to kind of show how basically everyone knew what a muslin was at this time, right? It was a big part of dress in Europe as well at this time. And in fact, he's talking about how much of a bargain it was, which is a bit of foreshadowing as to why the Indian textile industry basically collapsed. But also, he makes a point of saying it's a true Indian muslin, so kind of implying that the best quality ones come from India. Which is true, they did, because they had the specialist skills and tools developed over centuries to make this incredible fabric. So yeah, what made it so special? So it was produced, the finest muslins were produced in Dhaka in Bangladesh, which history was a part of India, the state of Bengal. And so the conditions, one thing, you know, that I personally remember from geography, learning about Bangladesh, is there's a lot of river, and that
Mm.
creates humid conditions. So particularly the Meghna River, um, which the cotton grew along the banks of, and this cotton, this particular species of cotton that had the finest threads, grew along the banks of the river and couldn't be transplanted anywhere else. Like it wouldn't grow. It was those particular conditions where it thrived. And it produced this thread that was very, very fine, but strong enough to warp on a loom. So strong enough to be the vertical threads on the loom that take most of the tension when you're weaving, which is an important point because if they're not strong enough, they will snap and then it's a nightmare and you're going to have worse quality fabric.
Makes sense.
So because of this river as well, it created humid conditions which were needed to spin the very, very fine cotton threads. And this spinning was often done by young women with good eyesight because you, otherwise you couldn't see the threads. And sometimes it was done on a boat um, in the mornings and evenings when the humidity was most.
Okay,
So
so almost using the dew to keep it working.
yeah, and in fact, today when they're trying to reproduce these, they actually control the conditions in the workshop to make it more humid, so that it's easier to work with. Because some fibers are easier to work with when damp. I mean, particularly spinning linen in Europe was often done using water to moisten it to make it easier to spin. But yeah, so they were also doing this 800, 1200 thread count. And only 8% of the total cotton harvest was used to make this finest of fine muslins.
I guess that
So,
makes sense. You're only going to be using the best bits to make the best stuff.
yeah, so they would like separate out the finest and softest fibers would be used to make this incredibly fine thread. And so that's why it was so expensive and so prized. Like all these conditions combine to make like the perfect place to make it. But that means there is a very limited supply of it because all these processes take a long time and a lot of
Yeah.
people. And you can't really reproduce that. Even with like modern technology, we can't reproduce it because it's it's such a fine tolerance that we don't have the machines to do it. It has to be done by hand. Um, yeah, so that's why it was so expensive and so prized and so rare. And in fact, it was pretty rare in Europe before the 16th century. Um, in Europe, linen was much more commonly worn than cotton. Silk was available because of trade through Venice and the Silk Road, but not really cotton, not muslin. Although it was very, very famous and traded with other parts of the world, such as China and the Middle East and Persia. So it became associated with the Mughal Empire, beginning in the 16th century, which came to control Bengal and Dhaka. And they were quite well known for wearing white muslin, like it was part of their dress. Um, and they sort of employed people to make it as well, and also I say employed, but also kind of exploited.
Yeah,
Not
like
as much
some of
as we did,
colonialism.
but the history of textile production is unfortunately quite often a history of people being exploited as well, because
I mean, history full stop, let's be honest.
yeah, as much as we love history.
Like, it's an empire, therefore they were not very nice to a lot of people.
Well, yeah, and also just textile production in general hasn't had a very high status. The textiles themselves have, but throughout history, because it takes so much time, um, it textile production is always an industry where people don't get paid enough for their time.
Mm.
Um, kind of wherever you are, wherever in the world. Um, so it was very, very popular in the Mughal Empire. In fact, the 17th century Mughal princess Zeb-un-Nisa, a daughter of the king Aurangzeb, who is also like she is a very interesting like historical person. She was also a poet and a philosopher. So yeah, interesting person to find out about. But she was once scolded by her father for appearing naked before the court, so the legend goes. To which she indignantly replied that she was in fact wearing 7 layers of muslin.
Is this where the, like, Seven Veils thing comes from?
Oh, I don't know, but possibly. I have no idea.
'Cause there's a thing, the Dance of the Seven Veils,
Hmm.
which comes up a lot in, sort of Orientalist type stuff, 'cause it's, I think Salome?
Yeah, okay, so I've heard it before in that context.
I'm just wondering if there's a connection, but I also have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know at all. I mean, I guess like I would have assumed hearing that it would be silk veils, but there's no reason it couldn't be muslin. But yeah, I don't know. If anyone knows
Sorry, I'm just
anything about this,
speculating now.
please let us know. um, so yeah, it began to be exported to Europe in the 16th century, with like sort of many countries had trade with India at that time. And at this point, this trade was still pretty slow. This was still production in the hands of the country that was producing it. Um, and it was being produced in pretty small quantities because of the time and expertise needed. So at this point, it was more expensive than silk, even. And as you can imagine, that caused a bit of a demand for it. And partly that demand was one of the reasons why in the 19th century colonialism got involved, and the Mughal Empire is kind of violently supplanted by the East India Trading Company and eventually the British Empire. So
They got away with a lot by just saying, "Oh, we're a company. We're absolutely not an imperial force," didn't they?
yeah, I mean, I feel like when you have your own army, you're a bit more than a company.
Yeah,
Um,
there's like there are some things where the distinctions are difficult, and there are some things where you can just say, "No, that one isn't just a company."
yeah, I mean, the British East India Company was very much like not just a company. Guess company in terms of like not so much a limited company as a company, as in like we are a bunch of people who are gonna do some bad stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's colonialism time, everybody. Um, so the reason that we do not have this incredible muslin anymore, kind of because of the British Empire. And this
What?
also kind of yeah,
The
yeah.
British Empire did a bad thing.
Gosh, I nearly spit out my tea, which of course is entirely British as well. Um, yeah. So when when the province of Bengal became under the control of the East India Company, they were also able to control the trade for muslins and for Indian cottons. And they were of course controlling other parts of India as well, and eventually the British Empire came to control basically the whole subcontinent. Um, so they were controlling this trade, and the traditional industry couldn't produce these fabrics fast enough to meet the massive demand for them in Europe. So they initially tried to make them produce faster, and they couldn't because that's not how you do it. Um,
It's not how anything works.
yeah, and in conjunction with the development of industry in Britain, the Industrial Revolution, they were then able to process cotton in Britain. So they began to produce British quote unquote muslins and sell them back to India. But of course, why would Indians buy cottons when they have a whole cotton industry at home? So that basically led to the British Empire destroying the Indian cotton industry. Um, yeah, by a combination of like economic destruction, by sort of flooding the market with these cheap British cottons that were made in factories in Britain. Um, but then
Yeah,
also
this is the time when I'm embarrassed to be from Manchester.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think the people of Manchester made a lot of money out of it either. Well, I mean, like the the rich ones did.
The
Um,
ones doing the work didn't,
yeah.
but even so,
I mean, yeah, exploitation across the board, basically.
yeah.
Um, and like some people in Britain got very, very rich out of it and built some very, very fancy buildings, which is still there. Um, hmm, Liverpool,
Mm.
Manchester. Um, anyway,
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been to several of them.
yeah, very nice buildings, but also they are made out of colonialism. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, back to the Indian cotton industry. Um, yeah, that's the reason that we don't have these fabrics today, and that the tradition of weaving them has died out as well. Because it was kind of ruined in the early 19th century. and that there is kind of it survives in a sense in the tradition of Jamdani weaving, which is like a patterned muslin. So it's actually like a kind of tapestry weave, but a very, very fine tapestry weave, where the pattern parts, the coloured parts, are like inlaid rather than like printed on or anything like that. So that is a very, very skillful technique.
I
And
will tweet a picture of that because that stuff is gorgeous.
it's so beautiful. It yeah, very, very skilled. And it still goes on today. And I believe there was a revival of it kind of in the 60s as well in India. It was kind of popular. But it is still going on today. They are like still around, but it's not a lucrative profession really. Apparently, according to some of the quotes from weavers that I've read, like it's the kind of thing you do more because it's like your vocation, it's your craft, rather than like you're not going to make a lot of money out of it. There's still a demand for it, but it's more of a kind of artisanal demand.
Yeah, it got geographical protection, didn't it?
It
Jamdani's
did, yeah. In 2013, it was designated an intangible cultural heritage asset by UNESCO. Um, so yeah, that now has protection, and I believe that it is now kind of a lot more well known within India and sort of getting more funding and more development and stuff, which is cool.
That is
Um,
cool.
yeah,
Protecting intangible heritage.
yeah. Which brings me
I don't really have an
to
end to that sentence. Just do it. It's good.
which brings me to the Bengal Muslin project. Now this was started off by a guy called Saiful Islam, who was working with a photographic agency called Drik in Bangladesh, which kind of does a lot of work around India and with um, sort of crafts and things like that. He kind of found out about this heritage of muslin and was like, well, why don't we do that anymore? Like, why can't we bring it back? Um, so he set out to do that and founded the Bengal Muslin Project. And what they did is they went out the riverbanks and they asked around and they found a possible match for the original plant, the original cotton plant that was used to make Dhaka muslin.
I love that methodology. It's like,
Yeah,
well, should we just go ask some people because they know more than we do?
it's great.
That's how we do things.
And
I
they
bet
also
it was
found
an old lady. Always an old lady that knows.
it is always like the oldest lady in the village who knows where the good stuff is. Um, yeah, and so they also found, and from an archaeological perspective, this is quite interesting as well. They found out some of the original tools that were used that were like the jaw bones of catfish, like
Oh,
really really fine teeth that were used as like combs and like beaters for the fabric. Yeah, and so they managed to find this plant that was like quite a big partial match for the DNA of the original plant, of which I think there are still like some samples left, because these original muslins, they sell for thousands, like hundreds of thousands. They are very, very prized. These examples of the original muslin.
I mean,
Um,
understandably from what you've said.
yeah, because you just can't get it anymore. So I then set out to go and find people that could do the weaving. And the people they found were these Jamdani weavers who still had some of these techniques. It wasn't to the degree of fine thread count that the old ones were, but they still had the weaving techniques. So they again went asking around, and they were telling people like, we've got this project, we want to bring back muslin, and we want to do this insanely high thread count, like we want to bring back the real muslin. And they pretty much all went, that's really cool. No, I'm not doing that. Like, it's ridiculous. And there was like one guy who said yes. And that's now like their leader of the project, who sort of teaches everyone else.
I support him 100%. Do you have his name?
Me too. And I will put a link on the Twitter to the website for Bengal muslin. Which, by the way, I haven't even talked about this, but the term muslin, nobody's really sure exactly where it comes from. Like, it might come from the French variation on something else, but I believe the Bengali term is mulmul. They found this guy and they started their project. And as part of this, they've made a film called Legend of the Loom, which I will link to the trailer of on YouTube. I don't know where exactly you can watch the film, but I will
That is a powerful name.
find out. It is a very good title. And on their website, there are some fantastic pictures, because this guy also came from a photographic agency. So yeah, I will link to the Bengal Muslin website, and I would encourage you all to go and check it out. And they have succeeded in recreating some sort of new muslin textiles. They have not been able to get up. They've not been able to reproduce exactly the old counts yet. But they've got up there. Their highest one, I believe, is 300 count that they've been able to do. And a lot of them have these sort of Jamdani designs woven in, which are absolutely...
I mean, 100 is still impressive.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, when we're looking at the modern ones of like 80 threads per inch max, like, that is incredible that they've been able to create this and do it by hand. So they basically had to adapt the old technology to the current practices and equipment that they have. They carried out a lot of studies to be able to do this, and they got their master weaver to recreate some. His name is Al Amin. So yeah, they apparently, such a fine fabric had not been manufactured in Bangladesh before this project, since before the British got involved. So yeah, they're still working with the spinners and weavers. They're growing this old variety of cotton, and they're continuing to do it. I believe they have a bigger team now, and yeah, they've in fact, I believe they have brought it back. It's now been designated Bengal muslin is now like a thing again, by I didn't write down which agency it was, but muslin is now
You said
so
that
it
Bengal
has
muslin is now a thing.
yeah, so it has kind of succeeded. They have been given a geographical indication by WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, of muslin. So yeah, it's kind of their thing now. So yeah, the future is...
That is very cool.
It is very cool, and hopefully they will eventually be available again. But this time owned by the actual people that made them and developed them.
That would be preferable, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that has been a short history of muslin.
Hello, I'm Mod Pencil from Probably Bad RPG Ideas. If you'd like to hear discussions of ideas such as what if in my urban fantasy game magic turns out to not be real, and what is the best rules for an ogre dad, then listen to the Probably Bad podcast, which is available on everywhere podcasts are and also YouTube. Or check out our Tumblr and Twitter.
I hope you enjoyed it.
So before we go on to local Larder, reminder that if you have an episode suggestion or you just want to say hi, you can email breadandthreadpodcast@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Twitter at Bread and Thread, where there are teasers for upcoming episodes, links to things that we talk about in the episode, and just things that we like.
And also on Tumblr at Bread and Thread. Yes, so we are, I will admit, very behind on transcribing episodes for various reasons. But I was transcribing the Christmas pudding episode yesterday,
Mhm.
and I got up to a bit where we just spend a while dunking on Yorkshire puddings for not being a true pudding. So I thought I'd learn more about Yorkshire puddings.
Excellent. To be honest, it's one of the most obvious regional foods in the UK, so it's about time. What did you find out about Yorkshire puddings?
I think it honestly just took a while because even though it's got Yorkshire in the name, like, you have them everywhere. Like, it would be weird to go somewhere in the UK and not be able to get Yorkshire puddings just in a supermarket.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's a thing. If you have Sunday roast, well, Sunday roast doesn't require Yorkshire puddings, but I
Yes, it
think it's a general consensus that it's a better Sunday roast if you've got Yorkshire puddings.
does. So the first thing I learned is that Hannah Glass, our old friend Hannah Glass from The Art of Cookery, in 1747 seems to have been the one who started calling it a Yorkshire pudding, or at least popularised the name.
Okay.
Before that is referred to as a dripping pudding.
Is that from you're supposed to make it very hot, kind of in fat to make it crispy?
Well, the idea is that you put the batter, the phrase that I found in a 1737 book, the whole duty of a woman, or an infallible guide to the fair sex, containing rules, directions, and observations for their conduct and behaviour of life as virgins, wives, or widows, unsurprisingly written by a very rich man.
Oh, that's a mouthful.
18th century book titles are just like that. Yeah, it gives instructions to make a good batter as for pancakes. Put in a hot toss pan, which is kind of like a roasting tin, over the fire with a bit of butter to fry the bottom a little. Then put the pan and butter under a shoulder of mutton instead of a dripping pan, keeping frequently shaking it by the handle, and it will be light and savoury and fit to take up when your mutton is enough. Then turn in a dish and serve it hot. So it's basically an idea of cooking it in a little bit of butter, but mostly in the fat dripping off a spit roasted meat joint.
Oh, I see. That
Just
seems. I
dripping
mean,
is basically a phrase that just means the fat that comes off a roasted joint. Nowadays, it normally means, like, specifically beef fat, which is also known as tallow. It's
yeah,
tallow candles and beef dripping. It's basically the same substance.
my dad describes his uncle as coming home every evening after work and having dripping on bread.
Yeah, bread and dripping is a
Just as a
very,
snack.
like, working class, fills you up kind of thing.
Yeah, it's calories
Yeah.
in like handy form.
'Cause you might make fun of traditional British food, but most of it is just there to keep your body going while you go and do a lot of hard work.
Mhm.
So don't be mean to working class food. Um, but yeah, so the basic idea was, you know, you're making something that is gonna fill you up to kind of let the meat go further.
Mhm.
You'd even sometimes serve the Yorkshire pudding, or the dripping pudding rather, as a starter. Just as is, like, hot with the meat fat on it.
Okay.
Um, there was apparently a saying for a while, um, I need to put on my best Yorkshire voice. Where's the sorry, I've lost the quote now. Yeah. Put on my best Yorkshire voice. "Them that eats the most pudding gets most meat." This is basically, if you make Yorkshire pudding, your meat'll stretch further.
That makes sense. I also
Um,
think it was very deceptive of you as a Lancastrian to put on a Yorkshire accent.
I mean, it's mostly how you do the "thes."
That's true. You can't do that any other way.
That and Lancastrians swallow our vowels a lot more than Yorkshire does, I think.
Mm.
It's hard to describe, but I know what I mean. Um, that's how communication works. So there is so a food historian called William Sitwell speculated that possibly the association with Yorkshire is the association with coal, and the idea of using a coal fire rather than a wood fire, letting it get hotter so the batter will get crispier.
Okay.
But
Okay. So yeah.
considering it was being called that from the 1740s, when it was still very much a dripping pudding rather than a separate
Mhm.
factor, I'm not entirely convinced about that.
Okay. That is kind of a mystery.
But interestingly, I think, yeah, in very poor households, you would actually just possibly buy dripping or like leftover fat trimmings from the butcher and just make the Yorkshire puddings themselves,
Mhm.
and not actually with the meat, just get the calories from the fat portion.
Mhm. Yeah, you get the meaty taste, but you don't have to buy the meat.
Mm. Yeah, there was also potentially, like I said, serving the pudding as a starter with the gravy, and then this is in a much more middle class setting, and then having your roast with more of like a parsley sauce.
Okay. I think that's the kind of thing a fancy restaurant would do today, like have a Yorkshire pudding starter.
Oh, it definitely would. Or go completely the other way and do what I've seen on some like Christmas markets and that, with what is called the Yorkshire Burrito, which is apparently a thing since like the 2010s, where you just get a big Yorkshire pudding and then you put slices of meat and a bit of stuffing and sometimes some mustard and a tiny bit of gravy, and then you just fold it like a burrito and eat it.
You can't see my face right now, but it's a picture.
I mean, I'm probably gonna yeah, I haven't been brave enough to get one yet, mostly just because it seems like the single most filling street food that I've ever heard of. But I'm probably gonna have to at some point, just out of a sort of morbid curiosity.
It does sound like something you have to try at least once. One.
I need to know, is that a general view, or is that just calling me out specifically?
Everyone. No, I'm talking to
Okay.
everyone here. Eat the Yorkshire burrito. Live life with both hands.
Something about that phrase makes me uncomfortable, but I'm not sure what it is.
Me too.
But yeah, interestingly, you could potentially have a 3-course meal that all has Yorkshire puddings in, because you could have it as a starter, you can have it in your roast, and some people would have it sort of left over the next day with things like cream and fruit syrups.
Don't know how I feel about that if it's got the dripping on it.
Well, I guess ultimately it is still a big puffy pancake. Like there's a pancake called a Dutch baby, which is basically a sweet Yorkshire pudding.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I guess. Do you remember that year that for your birthday we did like a
Are you
3-course
suggesting we
pie
need to
dinner?
repeat that with a 3-course Yorkshire pudding dinner? Maybe. But
Maybe.
yeah, like I was talking to a friend who is in like pastry school, who was basically saying, yeah, there is basically no functional difference between a big Yorkshire pudding made the modern way and a Dutch baby.
Okay.
Interestingly, there is a version of Yorkshire puddings called a popover in the US. That are also known as Laplanders, but I cannot find a reason for that. Including there's a version called a Portland popover, which has garlic and herbs in it, which sounds delicious, quite frankly.
Oh yeah,
Like
that sounds really
if you're
good.
gonna, it feels like just acknowledging that it's a savory pancake and just going for it. Yeah.
Crunchy savory pancake. Mm. That would be great if you were to have like, you know, those places that serve like a whole roast dinner in a Yorkshire pudding.
Oh, and my mum has been known to do that. Like she'll make like a plate-sized Yorkshire pudding each, and then put the whole roast dinner inside it.
Yes.
So there is also the toad in the hole, which is completely different to the American meaning of toad in the hole, which is basically
There's an American
I've
meaning of
seen it
toad in the
used to
hole.
mean the thing where you make a hole in a slice of bread and then fry an egg and the bread at the same time with the egg inside the bread.
Okay. I mean, I guess like the rational part of me thinks that that makes sense. It's the same thing. It's like a thing within another thing, which is also what our toad in the hole is. But like the emotional part of me is like, oh, it's sausages and
So yeah,
batter.
a toad in the hole is basically a giant Yorkshire pudding with sausages cooked inside it. Which is again a concept that pops up in both Hannah Glass and Mrs. Beeton. Hannah Glass uses pigeon and Mrs. Beeton uses steak and kidney.
Wow. Neither of them use
Um,
sausages.
there's also a Italian British cook called Charles Francatelli.
Isn't he the
He
one that
was,
was Queen
yes.
Victoria's cook?
He also published a cookbook called The Modern Cook, where he just specifies
Ah,
a shilling worth of any kind of cheap meat. But he
that's
seems to
something
be
I can
one
get
of the
behind.
first people to call it toad in the hole in print. Although Hannah Glass's pigeon version is
Okay.
called Pigeon in the Hole, which suggests that it was known as that kind of thing in the 1700s.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like it was a. There were a lot of things with whimsical names back then, right?
Should probably clarify, there is no record of it ever being made with toad, it's just people being silly. Well, I mean, it's something that I assumed when I was a kid that was at some point someone must have made it with toad. People eat frogs.
Okay. Yeah, I
And I
never
was
I
I
never
was a
had that,
very
I think.
literal-minded child. So the last thing I want to say about Yorkshire puddings, just because it amuses me, so there was a man relatively recently moved to the Rockies and wrote to the Royal Society of Chemistry as being like, why doesn't my Yorkshire pudding work at higher altitudes? Because it wouldn't rise properly. The answer to which is physics, chemistry, physics. Something to do with the pressure, the same as how you can't, like, water boils at lower temperatures at higher altitudes. I am not a scientist. But as a result of that, the Royal Society of Chemistry just decided that it was their place to say in 2008 that a Yorkshire pudding isn't a Yorkshire pudding if it is less than 4 inches tall, which is quite tall.
I mean, are we going around putting rules on it now? Like, who are they
Like,
to
I feel like
say
it was
that?
a mostly joking thing, but also that's very tall.
Yeah. That is quite tall. That's so not fair. That guy in the Rockies is not gonna be able to do that.
Actually, there is one more thing, which is that there is a thing on, because, Lancashire and Yorkshire rivalry has become somewhat silly over the years.
Yeah, it's nowadays it's more like just a traditional
Yeah, there are very
rivalry,
few
right?
people who would actually take it seriously. But yes, there is the annual World Black Pudding Throwing Championships in Ramsbottom in Greater Manchester, where you throw your black pudding at a pile of Yorkshire puddings, allegedly to symbolise the victory of Lancashire over Yorkshire in the Wars of the Roses.
That sounds extremely made
It
up.
absolutely is, but also it's a thing you can now do in Ramsbottom.
Oh, that's very funny. If you're on the tourist trail in Manchester, there you go.
I mean, I still need to go to the Ramsbottom Chocolate Festival, so I think I just need to spend some time in Ramsbottom and throw some puddings.
We get the pudding throwing contest marked as intangible cultural heritage.
So yeah, that's my final Yorkshire pudding fact, is that one day a year you can throw black puddings at a stack of them in the middle of the street in Manchester.
The rest of the year it's
Andy
illegal.
Burnham will get you.
Personally.
I'm sorry, Andy, I'm sure you're very nice.
Just imagining him running down the street brandishing a black pudding.
So if you want to buy me a bus ticket to Ramsbottom, we are on Patreon as Bread and Thread, where you can get access to the Discord server where we chat about things that we've been making and about the episodes. Monthly recipes, and if you give us 10, can't remember what the default currency is, I think it's $10 or a bit under £10, we will make you a bonus episode on anything you want, up to and including throwing puddings at things.
We will intrepidly go to the pudding throwing festival and find out with our own eyes and ears what is going on.
I mean,
We will
considering
report
that
back.
the podcast is now on YouTube, it's very tempting to go and just get some footage to put up. I don't know when it is. Hopefully it'll be on this year. Fingers crossed, and we can go.
I feel like that is quite easy to socially distance a pudding throwing event, probably.
But yes, thank you for listening, and please buy me a ticket to it, lovely listeners. I want to throw the pudding.
I support your pudding throwing dreams.
So our next episode will be a bio one, so stay tuned for us trying to talk about Mr. Kellogg's objections while remaining a clean podcast.
That's going to be fantastic.